Good morning. Again, Woody's asked me to come up and share my story with you, and I'm just going to tell you the way that God kind of laid it out to me and how He brought me to where I came to the decision I came to about a year ago. I grew up in a Christian home all my life. We'd go to church every Sunday morning, but yet Monday through Saturday, I'd see a different story kind of lived out in our home. You know, growing up in a Christian home like that, where I didn't see a relationship kind of lived out in the home from my father and my mother, it became easy to kind of adopt that same type of characteristic as I came into my teenage years and into my early adulthood. I'd gotten to the point where I was going to church every morning, going through the rituals, going through the routine, but Monday through Saturday it was a different story. I would live a different life. And I really didn't give much thought about how I was living my life until I got older and I started having children of my own. And when I started having children of my own, I started thinking, man, do I want my kids to have that same distorted view of Christianity that I had, where they just get up on Sunday mornings, go through the motions, and then they don't see it lived out in me throughout the week. And that's exactly what was starting to happen. You know, we'd come to church. You know, I'd been coming to Blue Ridge for about 4 years. I'd take them to the back just for the social interaction. It was good for the kids to be here. You know, I kind of adopted the theory, last in, first out type of thing, and I wasn't looking to try to move towards God. I was just going through the routine. And as I sat there and I always questioned growing up in that environment, you know, am I really a child of God's? You know, because when you go to church on Sunday morning and you live a different life for the next 6 days out of the week, I always would question where I was really at with God. And so about a year and a half ago, Peggy was up here on stage and she was given an invitation for a new Seekers class that they were getting ready to start. And I knew in my heart that a Seekers class was for people that weren't Christ followers yet, that still had questions about Christianity, and this was a place that they could go and kind of get their questions answered in a kind of an informal setting. But one thing she said when she gave the invitation, she said that the Seekers class was also for people who have never had a relationship with God, that wanted to have a relationship with God, that this might be a class for them. And so I was sitting in the back of the auditorium, and I remember thinking, well, I'm a Christian, I've gone to church all my life, grew up in a Christian home. I said, but I've never had this relationship part of what she was talking about. So I thought I would go to the Seekers class to see if I could learn more about that. And so as I went into the Seekers class, again, I was thinking, all right, my prayer going in was, all right, God, tell me where I'm really at with you. Am I a child of yours or am I not? And so as I started going through over the first couple weeks, God was faithful in allowing me to examine the motives behind the decisions and things I was making. You see, kind of going back through my teenage years and even into my early adult life, it was easy to look back and see a lot of the poor decisions you're making, a lot of the bad choices and the way you're living. It was easy to look back and say, all right, if those are the decisions and the actions you're doing, you must not be a Christ follower. But after getting married and settling down for the last 8 or 9 years of my life, I started making a lot of good choices. It wasn't quite as clear. But He allowed me to see that even in my motives behind even the good choices I was making, that they didn't have anything to do about Him. See, the decisions I was making, they had to do with how people would perceive me, what was the right decision to do for the group at large. They didn't have anything to do with I loved God or I was trying to be obedient because I was a child of His. He allowed me to see that even in good decisions and right decisions, the motives behind what I was doing were still self-serving to me. And even taking that a little bit further, if you think about motives, you know, motives are really a pretty strong indicator of where your heart's at. And through that motives and Him allowing me to see where my heart was at, He allowed me to see that my heart wasn't with Him. And so I came to the conclusion over those first several weeks that I wasn't a child of His. And I thought, okay, well, once I realized that it would probably be an easy fix. I'd say a prayer like I'd done before, and we'd move on. But I didn't have any desire to want to even do anything about it. So I kept coming to the Seekers groups over the next several weeks. And the next thought that ran into my mind was, well, what's going to make this time any different than any other time? You know, I'd walked an aisle before. I sat in a chair when they'd given an invitation, said a prayer to myself when things were going bad in my life without any change. And so I thought, well, I'm not in any hurry to make a public spectacle out of myself and say I've had this change and have a 2 or 3 week emotional high just to have it go back to the same old thing like it had before. So I kept coming, and I remember it was a Thursday night. I went home. It was after the Seekers class, and it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. And I remember waking up and God saying to me, He says, it's going to be different this time, Ron, because you can't be spiritually lazy. I don't think like that. I don't even use those type of words. And so the thought kept running through my mind is the way it's going to be different this time is you can't be spiritually lazy. For you to have a relationship with me is going to take some sort of action on your part. You're just not going to step across that line, go back to the same old way of living, and we're going to have this great relationship going forward. And even if you think about that in human terms, you think about having a relationship, it takes 2 people to have a relationship. And if only one person's putting in effort towards a relationship, it's really not much of a relationship. And so He answered the second question by saying, the way it's going to be different this time is you can't be spiritually lazy once you step across that line with me. And the thing was, even though he had kind of answered that second question over the next several weeks, I still didn't have any want to or any desire to even step across that line and fix it. So I kept coming to the Seekers class, and they go through the book of John in the Seekers class, and we got up to where we were going through John chapter 5. In John chapter 5, they talk about the invalid at the pool. This man had been at the pool for 38 years and couldn't physically walk. And Jesus approached the man, and he asked him if he wanted to be made well, and the man said yes. And so he said, why don't you pick up your mat and walk? And so the man picked up his walk, and he was able to physically walk. And I remember driving home that night from Seekers class thinking, you know what, Ron, you've been a spiritual invalid for 35 years of your life. Just pick up your mat and walk. You see, he had been faithful, and he had answered the question, was I a Christian? And the answer was no. And my next thought was, how's it going to be different? And he said, you can't be spiritually lazy. And still not having this desire to want to do anything, he said, just pick up your mat and walk, Ron. Just step across that line. But even after he laid out even a third piece of the puzzle, I still didn't have any want to want to fix it. In fact, quite the opposite started happening. I remember I started getting really cold towards God. I actually started skipping a bunch of Seekers classes right after that. You know, I was coming to church again, but it was kind of like prior to starting the Seekers class. I was, last in, first out. I was just here for the kids, wasn't looking, to move towards God at all. And I started getting real distant. And I remember it was December 11th, 2005, and Peggy came up and she grabbed me before one of the services, and she said, hey, how you doing? I remember I hadn't seen her for several weeks because I was skipping. And she said, how you doing? I said, I'm doing good. And she said, no, how you really doing? And I said, well, I've maybe regressed a little bit. And I remember even saying it kind of maybe even cocky or arrogant to her because I really didn't care where I was at that point. And so we stepped out into the hallway a little bit, and we started talking. And she said, hey, if you get some time this week, maybe you could stop over to church, and maybe we could just get together and pray a little bit, and I can pray for you. And I thought that was a nice gesture on her part, and I thought, okay, I can do that. So I slipped back into the service, and she went on about her business. And as the service went on, near the end of the service, I remember I started kind of getting a little bit emotional. I don't know why. I guess I was thinking back about the way God had laid out the three different pieces of the puzzle for me, but I still didn't have this want to or desire to do it. But I started feeling these strong emotions to the point where it almost started feeling like an anxiety attack, where I just wanted to get out of the room. And so I slipped back out of the room into the hallway where we'd been earlier that morning, and I couldn't shake the emotion that was going on. And I was having this kind of a conflict in my head. One side of me was saying, Ron, you're being ridiculous. You're blowing this thing out of proportion. And the other side of me was saying, well, why don't you just go find Peggy this morning and pray? It doesn't need to wait till later this week. And so I sat out there with those two thoughts in my mind, kind of playing back and forth for about 4 or 5 minutes. And I finally decided, okay, well, I'll just go find Peggy and we'll pray now. And so I walked out into the foyer area, and I found Shay, and she was there, and she went and found Peggy for me. And we went up to the conference room, and we were going to pray. And she said, I'll pray for you. And she said, when I'm done, she says, either you can pray or I can lead you in a prayer. And I said, okay. And so she prayed, and when she got done praying, she said, do you want to pray? And I said, no, I'm not ready. I don't want to pray. You see, I said, because you got to remember, for me, the thought was I still had a fear of what was going to make this time any different. I said, I don't want to make a decision out of emotion. I said, because if I make a decision out of emotion, I'll get that 2 or 3 week kind of high, and then it's going to go back to the same old thing. I said, I need to go home, and I need to think through this thing logically. And I thought if I came to a decision logically, that it would be something that would stick a little bit more permanently. And so I said, no, I'm not, I don't want to make a decision out of emotion. So I went and got the kids, and we jumped in the car, and we drove home. And I remember driving all the way home. I still couldn't shake some of the emotions that I was feeling as I drove home. And we got home, and I went inside, and I ran upstairs, and I grabbed my Bible, and I opened it back up to John chapter 5, and I read back through the chapter where he was saying, just pick up your mat and walk. And I came back downstairs, and I told my wife, I said, I got to head back over to church. And she was like, what do you need to go back over to church for? And I didn't even want to tell her why I was thinking about coming back over to church, because at that point I still wasn't even sure I was going to make it all the way back over here, as I was still having this battle going on in my mind. And so I just said, I'll tell you when I get back. And so I jumped in the car, and I was coming back, and sure enough, all the way over, again, I'm so logical, I was sitting there thinking, Ron, you're blowing this thing out of proportion, you look stupid. And I thought one thing that might help me actually get all the way back over here was I called up and I talked to someone at the front desk, and because the second service was probably getting close to letting out, and I didn't know what time they'd be leaving. And I called up and I said, hey, can someone just let Peggy know if she's still over there to just hang around, that I'm coming back over, I wanted to talk. And so I come all the way back over here, and I get in the parking lot, and I still sit out there for about another 10 minutes just deciding, do I really want to go in and do what I think I'm going to do? And I finally decided I would, and so I walk in, and I find Peggy, and so we go back up into the conference room where we'd been. And, through all the emotion and through all the logical just kind of back and forth as I was kind of battling in my mind if this was a decision I wanted to make, we finally went up to the conference room that day, and I finally picked up my mat that morning, and I walked, and I accepted Christ into my heart. And I told you when I was there earlier that morning that I didn't want to, the first time we went up to the conference room, that I didn't want to make a decision out of emotion. But what I've learned in hindsight a lot of times is that God is an emotional God, and He does allow us to feel those emotions. And sometimes when He's letting us feel those emotions, that's Him kind of tugging at us saying, come on, Ron, just step across that line. But I didn't know that at the time. But on that December 11th morning when I came back for the second time, I did step across that line and I accepted Christ into my heart. And even though that was the story that I was experiencing on that Sunday morning, the things that were going on in my life, there's a whole other side of the story, the things that were happening that Sunday morning that I didn't know anything about until after the fact. And that's kind of what Peggy's experience was as she went through after she talked to me that morning when we stepped out into the hallway. And so she's going to come up now and she's just going to share the experience she had.
Hi. Thanks. I'm going to try to do this. Been a year now, and even listening to this, it's still very emotional for me, so I'm going to do my best here. When Ron first started coming to the seeker group, I pray for everybody that comes to that seeker group, but there was something a little different. I prayed for Ron with a little bit more urgency. And I really didn't understand it, but I did it. And some of you will remember I used to run around here getting anybody that I thought would pray and say, please pray for a man named Ron. Please pray, please pray. And I did that for quite a while. I even had people have Ron's name on their refrigerator door so that every time they opened, they would pray for him. So there was a sense of urgency that I am not used to and have never felt before and didn't even know him. So that's how it began for me. And as he was saying, he stopped coming to the seeker group. Well, boy, did the urgency increase. Again, with me not really understanding what was going on. And that day that we were out there talking, you know, when I pulled him out to ask him how he was doing, and he arrogantly did tell me that he was regressing, what he didn't say is what that did. When he said that to me, it was like a hit. I can remember being immediately emotional when he said he was regressing, and I remember trying to hide it because we didn't know each other, and it was weird. But I remember that, and I encouraged him, and he went on back in, and I went out to do the stuff I do around here on Sundays. But you know what happened? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was having. I couldn't shake the emotion that I was feeling, which at the time was very unusual for me to be emotional. And so I couldn't understand what was going on with me. So I kept trying to block it and do what I needed to do around here, and wasn't working. So I remember I came back in. It was toward the end of the first service, and Ron was in here. And I remember they were playing that song, Take My Life. And I remember I got back in the corner over there and got on my knees, and I started praying for him. And I mean really praying. I was praying all kinds of stuff. I was praying for God to open his eyes, to get through that barrier that Ron had around him, to show him who he really was, to do something where Ron would be impacted by him this morning. And I was praying and praying and praying through that song. And then I got up and I walked up and I looked over there to where he normally sits, and he was gone. Well, again, the hit. I was very, very sad and pretty devastated for whatever reason that he wasn't in there, that he had walked out. And so that was really tough. Okay, about that time, it was the end of the service. And I'm supposed to come up here and sit and see if anybody wants to talk or pray. So I was coming up, and I got about as far as that tech booth right there. And I can remember stopping there and turning around and going back and to that door back there, and I remember I was holding on to the door jamb, and I was saying, God, where is he? Where is he? Where is he? Again, the logical piece going, what is your problem, Peggy? So I turned, and I'm telling you, had to try it 3 times to try to come up here. Couldn't do it. So the third time I went, and I was standing by the door jamb, and that's when Shay came up and said, a man named Ron is looking for you. So, I can't even describe what happened inside my heart at that point. So I went out, and sure enough, there he was, and he was emotional, and I had never seen that before. And so we went up, and as you know, we went up and prayed, and you know all that. Okay, as we were coming, he decided not to accept Christ. He wasn't ready. At that point, I was coming down the steps. He was going home, and this is when it got really strange for me. I was coming down the steps, and I was thinking, okay, this is good news because now we've prayed together. He's back on track. He's going to start coming to the secret group. He's agreed to that, and he's heading back toward God now. This is good news. This is great. Only that is not the emotion that I was feeling at all. The exact opposite was happening. I was coming down the steps, and I was feeling more and more emotional, a deep, deep sense of sadness, pain. I was feeling pain. And I didn't understand. I don't understand what's going on. Getting more and more emotional, trying desperately to pull it together. So I walk back in here, and the second service is beginning. And I walk back in, and they're playing the songs, and I looked over there to where Ron normally sits, and I fell apart, standing back there, completely lost it. Tears rolling down my face. And what I felt, and I don't understand this even now as I'm telling you this, but what I felt was a sense of finality. It was done. And I'm saying, no, it's not done. He's come to the secret group. Everything's okay. No, it was done. This is just the feeling I was having. So at this point, there's no pulling it back together, you know? So I'm trying to think of where can I go so nobody can see me. And so I went to the youth room, the senior high room, and it was dark in there, and they were praying. I said, okay, good. So I went in there, and I got on my knees, and I was just not going to pray, to be honest with you. I was going to try to see if I could get myself together. That was my deal. So I got on my knees to do that, and this is the part that I would kind of hesitate to tell you because it sounds so weird, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. So I got on my knees, and I started praying, which was not my plan, but I started praying, and this is how it went for me. Okay. I was praying, God, please bring him back. Please bring him back. Please bring him back. And I was praying with little faith because he's not coming back. He's taken his kids. He's gone home. He's not coming back. And so I prayed it. But I prayed it fast. I kept saying it again and again. And I'm sobbing at this point. I can't catch my breath. I have never prayed so hard, begging God, please, please, please bring him back. It was almost as though it wasn't even me anymore. Okay, so I get up off the floor, and I go behind the tech booth at the senior high room, and I'm standing there desperately trying to pull this together. And they were singing songs. I thought, okay, I'm going to concentrate on the song. I'm going to sing the song, and I'm not going to think about this anymore. So I started to do that, and then one of the lines in the song was, I want the heart of Jesus. And so I was singing that, and then I realized if this is the heart of Jesus that I'm feeling this morning, if it's a piece of what he goes through, the pain, the rejection, the devastation when someone says no, I stopped singing. So, I don't want your heart, Jesus. I can't even sing that authentically because it hurts too much. And so that's what I was feeling. At that point, somebody walks up to me, hands me a note, and says, Ron's on his way back. I can't tell you. It was as though God handed me that note. And so you know the rest of the story. Got up, walked out there. Ron turned his life over to Christ.
I work up at Liberty University. I've worked up there for 4 years, and every Wednesday the staff and faculty are required to attend convocation. And several months ago they had a guest speaker come in, and he talked about 4 chairs. And he started out his service, and he said, the good news is that everybody in this room is sitting in one of these 4 chairs. And then he went through and he decided that he was going to start explaining what each of the 4 chairs stood for. And the first chair that he came over to, in chair number 1, he said, these people right here, these people are Christ followers. They're children of God. He says, but they're passionate about God, and they're crazy in love with God, and they do crazy things. They pray. They believe in heaven and hell, and they don't want other people to go there. And they tell people about God, and they're just passionate about their relationship with him. And if you think about that in human terms, and you think about when you met your spouse or a boyfriend or girlfriend and you fell in love, and you think about all the crazy things you used to do when you fell in love and you didn't care what other people thought about you. All you thought about was you just wanted to please that person because you were so passionate about them. And that's what this chair is all about, is people that are just passionate about God. And he came over and he talked about chair number 2. He said, chair number 2, these people are Christ followers. They're children of God as well. He says, but chair number 2, they've gotten used to God. He goes on and he talks about how chair number 2 is a picture of the church today, people that are Christ followers, that have gotten used to God. They're going through the motions. People in chair number 2 feel uncomfortable by people in chair number 1. Chair number 2 would love to see chair number 1 compromise a little bit. Chair number 2 is taken for granted the price that was paid for them when Christ died on the cross. And these people are just going through the motions, and it's a picture of the church today. And then he came over here and he talked about chair number 4. He said, chair number 4, these people are not believers. They're not Christ followers yet. He says, and people in chair number 4, and they know that, but they're looking down and they're seeing the picture of the church today, which is chair number 2. And they're thinking to themselves, if that's what Christianity is all about, or being a Christ follower is about, I don't want anything to do with it. And so they're looking down and they're seeing chair number 2. And so the speaker goes on and he starts apologizing to people in chair number 4 because he doesn't even know why chair number 2 even exists in the church today. That there should only be a chair number 1. There shouldn't even be a chair number 2 in the church. But people in chair number 4 are being stopped because they're seeing people in chair number 2. And so then he goes on and he talks to the people in chair number 4, but he's saying, you're not thinking real clear either. He says, you're allowing somebody else's actions to determine what your eternity is going to be. So basically, they're looking down and they're seeing the actions of people in chair number 2, and that's the block that's keeping them from having a relationship with God or moving towards God. And he's telling them that, you can't look down and look at chair number 2 because it shouldn't even be existing. I think about my mother. She was here over Thanksgiving. I talked to her on the phone before she came out, and I had a conversation with her a little bit just to start talking about where she was at with God. And I told her we'd talk about it more when she came out at Thanksgiving time, and so we did. See, my mom sits in chair number 4, and I told you I grew up in a Christian home where we'd see it lived out on Sunday going through the motions. Well, my mom lived that same experience in that home before my parents split up. And her whole her whole reason for not moving towards God is, she always takes it back to the actions of my father or the Christians that she was around during that time, that she didn't see a difference in them than the people of the world that she runs around with. And so she wants nothing to do with Christianity or stepping across that line because of past experience. She's looking down at chair number 2, and that's stopping her from making that. And I just tried to politely tell her, I said, Mom, I said, that's not real smart. You're letting the past actions of Dad or other people that you've been around with him determine what your eternity is going to be and what your relationship with God's going to be. And so then the speaker came over here to chair number 3. And he said, chair number 3 is the most dangerous chair of all 4 chairs that are sitting here. He says, because chair number 3, these people think they're Christ followers, but they're not. And he goes on and he says, from the outside eye, you look at chair number 2 and chair number 3, these chairs look identical looking in. They both go to church. They both pray. They both believe in God, maybe. Chair number 3, like myself, has probably walked an aisle before, maybe even said a prayer, sat in a chair, said a prayer. He says, but these people aren't Christ followers. He says, and that's the danger of chair number 3 versus chair number 2, even though they look the same, that these people aren't Christ followers. And so you say, well, what do the 4 chairs have to do with what you shared with us and the story that you had and what Peggy went through? Well, when I heard this story, I thought back, the different pieces of the puzzle that God laid out to me. If you come back over here to chair number 1 and you think about how these people are just crazy in love and just passionate about God and they don't care what other people think, these people right here wouldn't be spiritually lazy. That piece that he gave me at 2 o'clock in the morning, he says you can't be spiritually lazy. Chair number 1, these people aren't spiritually lazy. Chair number 2, picture of the church today, people that have gotten used to God. These people are spiritually lazy. So I came over here to chair number 3. How did I know I was sitting in chair number 3 versus sitting in chair number 2? Because I certainly knew I wasn't in chair number 1. But over the last 8 or 10 years when I started making a lot of good choices and I told you I was making the right choices and things like that, I could have logically gotten to the point where I could have talked myself into saying I'm sitting in chair number 2. But again, God allowed me to look at the motives behind even the right choices I was making. And through those motives, he allowed me to see that my heart wasn't with him in those decisions, that they were still very self-serving motives. And so what did it take for me to get out of chair number 3 and get to chair number 1? And that's where John chapter 5 came in, when he just said, pick up your mat and walk. It just takes picking up your mat and walking, coming over here and getting in chair number 1. And so I just wanted to share that with you today because the analogy, when I heard that service, it really tied into what I thought about the different pieces of the puzzle that God laid out to me. And so I just wanted to share that with you guys this morning. So thank you.